What is happening, Post Shifters? Welcome back to another episode of the Post Shift Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Shawn Soole. I'm really looking forward to chat. Well, I always say this. I always say I'm really looking forward to the chat today, but we're changing up the pace a little bit. We're actually talking to a James Beard Award-winning filmmaker, Evan Rogers, today. I'm just clicking some buttons. Evan Rogers today about his project last year that got a James Beard Award called The Great Wall. And if you haven't had a chance to watch it, please go track it down on Vimeo or YouTube. I'll put some links at the end of all this so you can check it out. But Evan, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me. I'm so glad we made this work. What a weird virtual world we're in, that we met virtual and now we're doing something together.
It is kind of crazy. Like we were saying in the green room is that this is the second time last episode with Chris Matthews, same thing. We met in Clubhouse, and Clubhouse was in the early days. It was really, really cool. I really enjoyed it. And I thought it was going to be really awesome. And then life got in the way, and all of a sudden it's not so much. But the amount of people that have messaged, I look back at messages, I'm like, oh, we did a Clubhouse in like 2021, I think. And you were like, man, just in a Clubhouse room with you was really cool. And we connected in Clubhouse, which is just insane now.
What a weird thing, because that was just, I mean, for me, that was I know for a lot of people that was a COVID space that that everybody found that worked really well, because obviously all of the not being in person element, I felt like that was a cool way to actually converse with people. And I won't lie, I wonder if you remember this, but some of those early rooms you'd hop in and Questlove or somebody big was on the stage, and then eventually some of these trolls and people came on, and those guys started to leave.
Yeah, like when the big names were just randomly in these rooms.
Yeah, I know. It was so weird. You'd be like in the audience thing, and some on your screen you were next to somebody like that, and they would start talking. And you're like, oh my gosh, it's Kevin Hart, or like something like that. But I was grateful for this weird pocket of as a filmmaker, like you're always looking to try to expand your network, and this didn't feel like a network to me. And it felt more like this kind of, like you said, like campfire chat thing. So people were throwing ideas and kind of didn't have this like defined space, and everybody was, COVID did that. I think everybody was kind of confused about what next moves were ever going to be. So I found that great as somebody who was starting my whole freelance journey during that. That was pretty cool,
What drew you to doing these, like starting the storytelling in the food and beverage space? Did you have experience in the food and beverage space before you sort of started delving into this?
Not in total. I had done some work. A good buddy of mine is Chef Alvin Kylon, who started a long time ago, started Egg Slut, which kind of blew up. It was a food truck for a long time when he was in college, turned into what it is now. Multiple destinations across the world. And then I did some stuff with him with First We Feast for a while. He was doing some kind of around his cookbook that he put out and life story. And that was around getting on and where we probably crossed paths. And I had felt there was some space that kind of had been occupied by something like Chef's Table, but didn't have quite, like we had mentioned this before we even got on, didn't have quite the depth or authenticity that I think could have happened with, just the big label side of Netflix being on that, or, some of the bigger outlets. At times it can feel like it fits a format that already exists. And I wondered if there was a way to do that mom and pop a little bit. And so when we connected, I was looking for that. And I actually feel like I met some people through there. Obviously we haven't connected since then, but some people on there that kind of helped influence where that went. So
yeah, because if anyone who hasn't watched Chef's Table, as I said, go watch it. The one thing I was saying in the green room is like there is this level of authenticity that the big format places you were saying can't delve into, because you kind of want to make it not what was me, I suppose.
Sure.
It is hard. Like being a chef, being a bartender, being in this industry is a hard industry to be in. So if you're as raw as you want to be, it sometimes come off as like, well, why don't you change jobs, man? Like the passion element doesn't really come into it. How did you go about like finding that like really raw, authentic sort of nature in Great Wall?
Well, I think it is it's something that happened January of 21. I was living in Santa Barbara. I was soul searching pretty hard because I'd worked in-house, couple different production companies, some broadcast, et cetera. I grew up in LA, but I stayed and was getting into post-production about 7 years in or so. And I was starting to feel kind of burned out, and I kind of got let go from a startup I was working at on the coast in Santa Barbara, and started to wonder what else is, around. Like, do I have to stay in California? That was a big one. I didn't know. COVID was kind of making it really undefined for all of us, especially editors that could be remote, right? Like, we could do that. A lot of times that wasn't acceptable necessarily for, playback sessions. Clients wanted to be present. They want to be with you in the room. I do admit that you get stuff done, but I kind of wanted to see the rest of the country a little bit more. And so me and my wife road tripped around the South and wound up visiting a friend in Greenville, South Carolina, which is where I live now. Really cool pocket of people. It's basically we're sitting right between Atlanta and Charlotte. So you've got a film capital in Atlanta, a somewhat growing food capital in Charlotte. I guess they're both food capitals, kind of growing film scene in Charlotte. And Greenville was just this really beautiful pocket. And I know that we've been starting to grow in the food space and whatnot. And I ran into this guy, his name's Rio Oshiro, and Rio had been talking to Kay Ling. And Kay Ling is the owner of Sumbar, who the whole Great Wall film is about. She had a whole, in the film, we talk about it, but she had a whole career change from chemical engineering into starting her restaurant to her parents' chagrin. She had grown up in restaurants in Ohio. Her parents were immigrants from China. This whole story. And Rio and I got to talking right away. And he was like, hey, I had this idea of doing this commercial with Sumbar. And it was just going to be a proof of concept, something. And I had just gotten off of a documentary that is called Spellers, about the communication rights for non-speaking autistics, which did very well. We won Best Doc at the Phoenix Film Festival. It got played all over, tons of screenings all over the US. And that taught me this formatting, which is what is in the film. The formatting of what it looks like. In this case, it worked wonderful with Keeling to put a minority voice specifically, or somebody that needed a spotlight in the spotlight. And what does that look like from a storytelling standpoint? And me and Rio were like, hey, I pitched him. I was like, let's make it something more than just a commercial, because we get hired to do commercials all the time. I do commercials all the time, all over the place. And this became something when we both got to know Kayling that turned into what it became, which was, we're just going to shoot one day and try to get something, maybe just a proof of concept trailer. Let's just do something, right? And then that turned into the full film. But I think when you're looking at a story like hers, which we can get into, it becomes really easy to craft. It's harder to create the space in the formatting to make it make sense to an audience, if that makes sense.
Yeah. How long were you filming? Because it goes over a couple of years. It's not like a 3-month little film shoot. It goes over a number of years.
Which is how all documentaries become. I mean, what I love and what I've learned on my other films and stuff I'm developing right now is you learn and you grow and evolve yourself as you evolve the story and that person in the story, your subject or subjects, plural, right? And we started with Sumbar before Sumbar opened. And the significance here is that Sumbar is a dim sum restaurant, Chinese restaurant that's in Greenville, otherwise barbecue and brews town, really not much diversity there in the food space. And she was doing something, I think that's a big part of it, doing something that nobody was doing. And her trying to open was we timed it somehow to where she was about to open. So we shot in the shell of a restaurant before there was anything. And so I think to answer your question, I think we just kind of started to assemble the pieces of what does this look like early? And what really is the story? We have the workings of a story. We have the workings of, it's like journalism. You have the workings of something, but you have to go visit. If it's about a restaurant opening, you have to do that due diligence to be there as the stages go, right? And we weren't there from breaking ground, but pretty close. And so I think it evolved over time, and our conversations with her evolved over time so much. And I adapted the formatting a lot in post-production to try to fit something that made sense on a more commercial hype type angle for the launch, but realized that wasn't really what this was about. And we had a real come to Jesus moment with her, and we're like, hey, we need to go deeper here. I know you have more to your story than just I quit my job and started this. That's cool alone. I think that's awesome, especially the timing, right? But over those 2 years almost, we retooled the whole thing, and it became what it is, which is really a somewhat identity crisis story for her at the beginning of like, my parents didn't want me to get into restaurants. They got into it because they had to. They had, the language barrier was strong for them, her grandma, and then her parents. They worked hard so I could get an education. And then I went right back into it.
Mhm.
She finished school as a chemical engineer. She was working as a chemical engineer and then decided, I'm going to go do this. So there was a lot in there that we knew off camera that we asked, hey, do we have the permission to explore this with you? And then it turned into what it is. And we can describe that more.
Yeah, because at the start she's like, "Well, I didn't ever really think that I cooked a lot when I was a kid," and then you start peeling back the layers, and then it's like, "Okay, no, you're multi-generational restaurateur." Like, I can understand most parents. Like, I'm a parent, and when my daughter talks about getting in the industry, I'm like, I just want you to do better than I have done. Like, it's a hard industry to be in.
Mm-hmm.
But then you see the legacy of like her grandmother all the way through, and it kind of like it was always and it was always going to end up happening.
Yes, it was. And I think she knew that. She knew, I think that was where, it's part of that kind of first act of the story, her identity crisis, quote unquote, that she was in. I think that was more of an off camera, and I don't want to make it sound dramatic. It wasn't crazy. It was just like she felt that kind of thing with her family. She didn't know, like, is this my thing or is this my family's thing? And she had to
Mm,
figure that out. And I think it seems multi-generationally, and her place is her own restaurant, and it's not a mom and pop per se, but it is small and
mhm,
it's intimate. I think she probably has 16 or 15, 16 tables in there. So you've got 30 to 50 people in there with bar service at any time. It's not a huge environment, which is similar to her parents' and grandma's restaurant. Like, it was small. So I wondered if she didn't know if she was inheriting it at first, and then how does she make it hers? And then it kind of culminates with the restaurant opening, with how we shot it, and she gained so much confidence from all of that. And you'll see it in the footage, but the second interview we did was the interview with the whole space was done, and she's sitting there with this confidence and kind of glowing new demeanor that we kind of were able to work on with her, which was, hey, this is cool. Like, I prompted it to her. I was like, listen, this is really cool that you decided to do this. You can't feel like on camera this is like, you don't know if you can own it, right? Like, because
mhm.
you don't know how much sometimes of this is actually true story wise, right? As an audience member, like, did we prompt her super hard? Did she, what liberties did we take, right? Everything that she said is fully her. If we just put her in a position to succeed the way that she did, and I think she gained confidence that, like, I did this, and I can feel like I did this. I don't have to feel like it's only my family's thing. Like, this is my thing. Her
Mhm.
family still lives in Ohio. They don't live here, so she did all of the financing, everything by herself, and that was, it showed through. So
Yeah, definitely. The first scene did definitely showed through when she was like, "You're just going a million miles an hour, so you just do everything by your gut." I think as restaurateurs, that's why we keep opening places, because it's almost so fast and so quick and so guttural when we're making these decisions that you don't remember how hard it was. That
yeah.
like you do it, you open, you run it for a couple of years, and like, I'm getting the itch again. It's like I need that dopamine hit to open a restaurant. But
Mm-hmm.
you do see that progression of her confidence and everything sort of progress through the film from the sort of very first scene
Mm-hmm.
through the whole entire documentary. How did you balance that out? Like, how did you balance out telling her story and then also balancing out the legacy and the cultural element to it?
I think one thing on the I do a lot in the documentary space, and you learn a balance over time of show versus tell, and I talk about that all the time. Show would be, you can summarize a lot of information in archival footage, right? So we show a lot of archival for family photos, all that stuff. Versus tell would be like, what are the moments that you really do need somebody on camera speaking to a certain effect, right? And so now when I approach, because I edited the whole project also, so when I approached the edit for it, I thought, what is the best way for me to that's a really good, it's getting me thinking. It's like, what is the best way for me to approach this from these are the standout bites that I need to have. I know that this 2 or 2.5 minutes of sound bites are the bites that I want from a story perspective that really connect the viewer to the message, right? I want those. But in what ways can I tell all of that, 70 years of history or whatever it is, 60 years of history, right? Well, I can do that through showcasing some moments throughout, right? Archival, text on screen that describes some things, all that stuff. From a technical standpoint, that's typically what I do. But I think it's really important to let your audience, especially in food and bev, right? Let your audience be able to breathe and feel the space that these people occupy, these chefs, because otherwise, there's, first of all, hopefully you'd want to go to the restaurant after you watch it and eat the food. Like that's a huge part of it, right? But then the second angle is would you really understand the mission, I think, of what they're about if you didn't figure out the balance between show and tell? You can't just beat people over the head with a bunch of exposition, or it's hard to follow. And you can jump. There was time jumps through the whole thing that kind of give you an idea. Sometimes something as simple as that triggers in our brains, like, okay, there's passage of time. And that do that just through text. Quick text thing, right? So I don't know. It's hard to do in a short because it could have been a feature. We could have gone, if we had bigger funding, we could have gone to China and gone way back in that. And we've thought about pitching that in the future. I think that would be a cool thing to do to unearth more of her grandma's story.
What was your biggest challenge doing the Great Wall? Because again, as you said, it was over a space of 2 years. Was it and because again we open restaurants so fast and so quick? Was there any moments you're like, I need to be there every day so I don't miss a single thing?
We did feel like that at times. I think a big element of that is what are the key moments to go and focus on. And she was very transparent with her timeline. Obviously, the restaurant opening was huge. When we first shot, I think we were probably 8 months in advance of that, when it was still completely, and that was her timeline was, hey, it has to open. So we kind of had a timeline to follow a little bit. But I think, what's really important is we shot that final interview and a lot of that golden hour looking, or, early morning footage with all of her stuff and the dinner that she did, all that was all toward the end of the timeline. And then we had footage from the event itself that we used, all that stuff. But I think what's key is what happened after, because we did all that and we put out a trailer January of 23 after that point, once we had shot that second day. And that's all we shot. We shot 2 days. That was it. And after that point, we kind of wondered, like, okay, still, what direction is the edit going to go? We finally finished the edit midway through the year. It took us a while because, we're always doing all other stories. And I think what happened after is the key, though, because we sat on it, and you have to sit on it sometimes to figure out, does it make sense? Does it make sense to the audience? Does it make sense to me? Because I have a bias. So I'm going to think, I know all that information. So if it's not making the edit, I already know that. But does your audience know? Like, what facts do they need to know? And then timeline wise, like, what was the next step? And the next step ended up being, we screened it locally, which opened the beard door. I don't know if you wanted to prompt something that way, but the beard thing was never even, it might've been in our periphery, but it wasn't a direct thing that we were thinking of,
How did that come about, the James Beard Award? Just screening it, and then all of a sudden someone saw it and picked it up and was like, hey, here we go.
Yes. And the key with this is we bootstrapped it. This was an investment for us, this whole thing. So I'd say it worked out pretty good. I mean, we figured, okay, we don't want to show this just to the web when it was done. We didn't want to just put it on YouTube. So we did a local screening in Greenville, invited out through a lot of Keeling's industry connects, food writers from the Southeast that all kind of came out and saw it and got to eat her food and watch it in a theater and all that stuff, kind of like a festival. I do a lot of the festivals and stuff. So very similar to that. We spoke about the themes of the film, and there's a writer who writes for Eater in the Southeast. Her name's Stephanie Burnett. She showed up and was like, oh my gosh. And a lot of people love Keeling, so it was a little bit easier for us in the Southeast. People know her. A lot of Charleston people know her. A lot of, that she's been in these circles a little bit. And Stephanie was like, hey, I'm contribute to James Beard. You guys have to try to submit to the awards for the next time around. And we were like, okay, we'll just try it. Cue another 4 months of waiting, find out we got accepted, and then the event happened July of last year. So we started filming in 22 and didn't even have the event until July. So 2 years after. And it was up against CBS Sunday Morning and a couple other big outlets. And it was really cool to have it, do what it did and win and all that stuff. And I think it's just validation that, like you said, that kind of storytelling can make a difference. And it doesn't have to be too heavy. It can be something that's like, oh, I wasn't conscious of this really before, like, the importance of food cultures all throughout. And being from Los Angeles, I grew up in that. But coming here, there is a big divide of like, yeah, when I said barbecue and brews, I literally mean breweries, barbecue joints, and coffee shops, and not a lot of these diverse spots like hers that are so great, So
that's the one thing that the whole thing never felt too heavy and too overly reflective. It was just the right amount of like reflection into Carling's story and that sort of thing. Now that the hospitality industry and the food and beverage industry is so dynamic, are you looking at doing more things in the space similar to this?
Yes, I've had a lot of pitching opportunities that popped up post James Beard. That helps immensely, as you might imagine. I know you guys are able to use it to such great success as well whenever it comes through. But I've pitched a very similar format for quite a few different series, and a lot of them are starting to kind of gain some ground, which is great. Again, ultimate blueprint being Chef's Table at the beginning of it. They were the first to really do it on any sort of cinematic level, really behind. There was the one feature doc that had come out right before it that inspired it. Anyway, so lots to come on that front. I'm excited about that. It's very cool to have something that gets vetted, even if the story never did get the James Beard seal of approval and the emblem and all that stuff. It doesn't mean that story's less valuable, obviously, and didn't make the same impact. But it is cool to see that, like, okay, it can be, the formatting can be repurposed, and I've been repurposing. And I think really what that is it's just my expression as a filmmaker or storyteller. I want to not continue in the same train of thought, but I do think you can build pockets that you're known for, right? And that's, I'm sure, very similar with food, right? You can do that. And I think there's so many crossovers between the two industries. That's what I get fired up about, is I can speak the same film language with chefs so much, and similar to what we're doing right now, because it is a deep, hard path for us. And it is very time consuming, and you put your heart into every part of it. So I think that crossover also made the piece special, and is continuing to do that in the future,
Yeah, now that you sort of mention it, I feel like there is an alignment between the hospitality industry and filmmaking, because it is a passion driven thing, and money in business is always sort of a secondary thing. You sort of do so much hoping it'll pay you back in the long run, and you just put it out and you do it for, as you said, like 2 and a bit years, like before the James Beard Awards. Like that's a bit of a haul,
and you don't want to go broke.
Yeah, exactly. You got to, and that's always the balance. You got to balance it so you're actually making money. But with the hospitality industry, especially post pandemic, and as we chatted about Clubhouse during the pandemic, when they're operating on the edge of survival, how do you handle sort of looking at that? Because now you are sort of going outside of that same format outside of the Great Wall. How are you going to sort of handle that, portraying that struggle authentically without losing that sort of hope in humanity and the stories that we were talking about before?
That's a great question. I think really what I've learned is, for my own personal journey, leaving Los Angeles was important for me. I'd grown up there. My father's in the studios, so I'm familiar with how all that functions, and it was important for me to take a journey myself and transplant myself somewhere to really do that growing and do that research for myself on where I wanted to be story wise. I think with food and bev, and just the way that our climate is across the board right now, I think, one positive from COVID, if there was a positive from COVID, I think, for those that made it through it, it really became a unifying force for conversation in a lot of ways. I found that I'm able to get deeper with people, which is a lot of my domain. I do a lot of very thoughtful level stuff similar to Great Wall. So I'm able to find deeper stories, I think, because of that in a lot of ways. And I hope that that's something that continues forward, because really what I'm doing now as a director, producer, and I run a post production. All of that is branched off of what happened during COVID. There's a lot of people on Clubhouse that I met that are still people that I see. So think about this. I didn't know. I met a dude on Clubhouse in one of the film groups. His name's Jordan Chapman. He connected me to my friend Max, who I now own a business with in Greenville, who he worked for in Colorado. And that's somebody who totally changed my life. I just saw him the other day and I was like, dude, like I haven't like hung out with you very much in person, but thank you for doing that, because it really did change my whole trajectory. I just happened to follow that lead, like that whole group of people now in film is all these independents and people that are starting their own companies and starting their own production companies and doing their things and finding these stories. And, it feels right now like it's a very pitch heavy growth thing in film, and it doesn't have to be right to the studios. So I'm hoping those stories, though, to what you brought up, I hope the depth of these stories continue. And I hope that it isn't doom and gloom 100%, because there's a lot of things in our world right now to make you feel that way. But I think people have access to do some pretty cool things now. I would say, entrepreneurs are able to get into more than they've ever been able to in some ways. And so I would say that's probably what I'm looking at story wise,
Are you going to do a follow-up with the Great Wall and sort of, because I'm guessing Sun Bar's been open for what, about 18 months now, almost 2 years ish?
Yeah. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Have you kept in touch and like, are you going to do a follow-up on like where they are now sort of deal?
I think it would be really cool. That's a great question. I think that idea of adapting it to be a feature at some point would be really cool. I think with the beard backing now, I think we could probably do something along those lines. I think it would be a necessary follow-up at some point. I would hope so. She is a really dear friend to us, to me and Rio, and she's in our very small friend group that we have out here. So we see her a lot and, always have conversations around what she's going to do next, what we're going to do next and all that. So I hope something happens. I will say Greenville is growing and on the come up for a lot of food stories. So I think there'll be, there's spillover that we're getting from New York, Atlanta, Charlotte, Charleston, all these kind of things are converging. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's more stories out of here.
Yeah, I got a couple of friends who are opening something up in Charleston. Well, they've been trying to open up something in Charleston for like 4 years right now.
Wow.
And they're just, I think, renegotiated their lease and they're going to be opening. It's the guys from Dead Rabbit in New York.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Shawn and that are doing that at their Hazel and Apple.
Wow.
Let's talk about business and entrepreneurship a little bit, because it is something that, because it's such a passion-driven industry for yourself, and same thing with us, how do you balance out that passion side of things with actually being grounded? And are you good at the business and the entrepreneurship side of things?
I've gotten better. I've had to crash course it. I think that's the best way to learn, to be honest. I'm sure you're that way too. I think you can do, from a collegiate standpoint, I got a communications degree.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I use it every day, but it's not the same as having that kind of internal structure that a lot of my accountant friends have. I have a good accountant, so that helps. But no, I think I've grown and learned it. The biggest strength for me, I think, and maybe partly how we met was, and still is, relationship building is huge for me. I think it does everything. I mean, I don't know if and it's not a network to me, I don't think it is networking. I think it is relationship building. Mm-hmm. is the verb, right? And I think that has been a huge door opener for me to learn structure and mentorship. I've had that and I've grown in that. And I've opened 3 different ventures. So I've got all my film work that I do as a director producer. I have a post house that I operate, and that's out of COVID as well, that I started. In Greenville, I have a rental house. That's the only rental house here for whatever reason. I mean, that's huge in film. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them in Atlanta, LA, all that stuff. But it's cool to be on the ground floor of that inventory, learning how to do all that stuff. And then I run TEDx Unity Park here, which is a TEDx conference that we do every year here in Greenville. It's grown quite a bit. We had a great first year in 2024. gearing up to be a lot bigger this year. And that's a whole different side of my brain. I mean, that's events and all of that. I'm on the other side of those a lot of times shooting them, but doing the event structure and promoting and marketing, something like that is different. It's totally different. You know how it goes. I mean, it's very, very similar in the film side for food in any events or anything like that. So I would say a lot of it just comes from surrounding myself with the right peer group. That's huge. I have peers in film and entrepreneurship, in 20s and 30s, 40s range that are all over the place. Some here local, some elsewhere. And it's just, you can't do any of this. You have food the same way. You can't do food or film without having that. It's really too hard to do to keep your morale up, I think, without those people to push you or bring you projects or you bring them projects, whatever. So network, not networking, but relationship building. That's like everything for me. It's taught me everything.
Yeah, I feel like networking more is a one-way street, whereas like, what can I do for you? What can you do for me? Whereas relationships are, hey buddy, how you doing? What are you working on this week? And more of a check-in, see how you're doing, and without having to have an ask.
Yes, 100%.
Networking and entrepreneurship gets a little icky at times. I'm going to be honest about that one.
Certainly does,
yeah. You do shaking hands and changing business cards. It gets a little icky at times.
A networking event versus a meetup. That's a huge difference. We run a film meetup here as well, and it's called Film Society, and dudes just come, anybody. But a lot of times it ends up just being a brewery hang, and you wouldn't believe this stuff. Like, we've had people show up to that for the first time and they're hired W-2 the week after. And that's Greenville. So like, that's a huge difference versus the name tag, go to a networking event. I've never had a good experience with that, unfortunately.
Neither have I. Is for the future for you, as you've been touring you've got a couple of projects and you're sort of working on the same format, is food and beverage and that sort of hospitality industry a big focus for you moving on?
Yeah,
it's a place with good storytelling.
It is a priority because of what we discussed. I think because of the depth of stories, the deeper personalities, like we've talked about, the stories of struggle for a lot of people and how you can make, I guess you're not making light of it. You're trying to, you're bringing a spotlight to it, trying to put a spotlight on those situations and how hard people work. I'm very energized about the South because of that. The South has a lot of things, obviously there's a lot of weird, bad stuff in the past, and now they're trying to improve. And Greenville felt like a sleepy town. I honestly feel the same about Charlotte in a lot of ways compared to what I grew up in. And to see them trying to grow that and trying to really, try to include everybody, try to be a part of like really improving the GDP in all these areas. It's cool to see. And I'm interested in that because I just think there's so much that we have not really seen or heard in these little pockets of people, right? And there's a lot of Southern culture is so different to me anyway. I mean, it is very warm and hospitable and all that stuff, but there's some grinders here that want to do stuff. And so I'm hoping that there are more, and there is in the works. There is stuff like that I'm working on right now with partners. So that's the way to grow, though. I mean, that's the only way to grow in this kind of storytelling is you have to have partners. And you have to connect it to something else as well, like screenings and all that stuff helps it. So,
and you're going to stay in smaller markets. I'm not going to see a documentary about a restaurant in New York or LA or something like that. Just smaller markets is sort of your niche.
Not. I still do so much business in LA, and I do business all over. I think you can find some unique stories in the smaller market that might be a smidge more interesting at times, or you can land in a big market in New York and have the biggest experience story ever. So geography wise, it doesn't really matter to me. I think I just have interest right now in where I'm at, but I travel and shoot everywhere. So
at the end of every episode that I do is the 5 deep questions. Okay. So they're very reflective. They're deep. I never send them out. I've had a few people go, "Can you send them to me just so I can reflect?" I'm like, "Nope. It's got to be off the seat of your pants." Okay. One lesson or experience that has shaped your perspective the most, and how do you carry that forward in your life?
That's a really good one. Really good. I think I would say one that comes to mind is to be very cognizant of every interaction and relationship that you have. of any stage, and to not into like mentorship has helped me in this one, not to sacrifice your personal life and pursuits, there, and family and all that stuff, for just trying to get ahead in certain career things, right? I think it's very easy for us to sacrifice for the art of film or food or whatever it is, or photo or whatever it is, right? But I've had to learn that you really should be very grindy like that in seasons. If you can figure out seasons of your life to do that, and to consider every relationship you have across the board, not just your business make money contacts, then you can kind of live a little bit more of a balanced life in the life that we find ourselves living. It sounds like
that's awesome.
high demand, high art, all that stuff. It's hard. Right. I've still been trying to balance. I've been working for 11 years, and I'm still trying to find a balance of what that looks like. And it sounds like people do until they retire. So yeah. I'm trying to do better at that,
If you could leave one lasting message or piece of wisdom for the world, what would it be and why?
Try to, we're all here. I feel like we're all here for a purpose. We serve a purpose being on Earth. Try to make an impact, I think, in somebody's life. And if you can do that in a cool way, like what we get to do, through experiences, through food, through visuals, or whatever it is, try to put the emphasis on somebody else for when you create or try to impact, instead of yourself. Go start with how they think first before you.
Looking back on your journey, what is something you wish you had understood earlier in life?
I know it's so cliche, but I maybe this is more even current, but try to allow myself to feel that I can have some patience with my process. I think that's one. I'm very quick to just first of all, OCD, that doesn't help. But just allowing myself to be able to work through my process in my time, push myself, but like, don't kill yourself doing everything. You're not perfect. So
how do you define success, and has your definition of it changed over time?
Yes, I mean, it goes in with what I said, first or second, with I've had to revalue what that looks like from a life standpoint. I think there's a lot of different levels of success you could have, but I would hope that for me, it's that I was present for people in my relationships, that I don't crowd myself so much that I can't be, and that I give myself the ability to process, breathe, recover, reset, all of that stuff. That's what I would probably say to that one.
What do you hope your legacy will be, and what steps are you taking to build it?
Really be multidisciplinary. I'm really trying to work on that. I've seen so many filmmakers that just stay in that path forever, and when the work dries up, they don't have it. And so that's, for me, on the film side, that's why I try to create it and pitch it a lot, not just because I have a whole engine of content that I'm getting paid to do, and of all different disciplines, but it's not always the most fulfilling, right? It's not. So you have to find the way to do that. And then the other would be, what was the other angle that I was going to go with that? Being multidisciplinary, try to diversify income the best way I can. I've got rentals. The rental business that I'm running is passive for the most part. I have, a meetup culture here that's growing and doing its thing. I own a house. I didn't think I was going to own a house in my late 20s, but that's cool. I'm stoked on that. Trying to buy more property and like get into that sort of game too. Not just think that everything I do is just my art.
Well, man, thank you so much. The Great Wall is a fantastic film. I'm going to post a link in the podcast and everywhere that I can possibly post it for you, because it really is a fantastic story, and just the way it's shot and the depth without being so heavy was just an amazing, refreshing thing. And as we said earlier, like it's not like the Netflix specials that are too polished. It was raw without being too intense. So it's really, really, really good film, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much, and good luck with the future. Like,
thank you.
Hopefully, we can not have to go back to Clubhouse to keep in touch.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time, man. Cheers.
Yeah.
Bye.